Hi there, and welcome to Pax Politica, the place where peace building and visual storytelling come together. We hope you enjoy this video, and if you do, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I'd like to take a slight detour now and focus on the process of mediation itself and talk a little bit about the gender aspect of mediation proceedings. Do you find gender to be a contentious issue when it comes to mediation processes? How come we see more men than women leading mediation proceedings or even being a part of mediation teams? Or is this a general misconception?
No, it's not a misconception at all. I mean, how come? I suppose the reality is that the way in which politics works, the way in which mediation works, reflects the way in which societies work. So, rather, the way in which mediation works reflects the way politics works in most of our societies. And most of our societies continue to be dominated politically by men. Even if you're seeing more female leaders, the predominance of men in politics across the world is still very great. So on that level, it's not surprising. It's not welcome, but it's not surprising that most mediators who are appointed tend to be men. It is changing, but I think we need to think beyond who's sitting at the table. That's important. It's a challenge, the fact that it's not just mediators who tend to be men, it's the people negotiating the interests of armed groups and of governments and parties in peace talks. They also tend to be men. So it's representing the hierarchies of societies. It's representing how gendered power dynamics work. It's representing the way in which masculinities are perceived as dominant. That masculinity is perceived as a dominant force in society. There's been, I think, a really important trend over the past few decades. Next year, we're going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. So that were the efforts that went towards generating that Security Council resolution were very considerable and initiated a high-level discussion around gendered relationships. And by thinking about what is the role of women in peace and security, you're thinking about what is the role of men in peace and security, and what is a relationship between men and women in this. And I think over the past 2.5 decades, there's been a great deal of progress, but not nearly enough progress. There are still huge obstacles to the participation of women in peace processes, as there are to the participation of women in many different dimensions of society. But there's a significant increase in the number of women who are playing significant roles. And I think one part of this has been a recognition of the need to think through the gender dynamics of how societies work, where power lies. What is it that enables women to play significant roles, and what are the obstacles to women playing significant roles, and what patterns of behavior are oppressive, and what patterns of behavior create more equal situations for people in society. So one dimension of this is broader societal change. Another dimension of it has been that in the last 5 or 7 years, more and more recognition has been given to the role that women can play in mediation itself. And one expression of that has been the establishment of a number of networks of women mediators. We've been involved in supporting a network of women mediators across the Commonwealth, from the Mediterranean to North Africa to the Middle East to Scandinavian countries. There are many different networks of supporting women mediators. There's also a global alliance of these networks. And I think they are an important representation and an important source of advocacy for the role that women can play in peace processes. I think it's really important to recognize that it's not just about thinking you can parachute a woman in to be a chief mediator and it will change the way in which talks will happen. Because however talented that particular mediator might be, they're confronted by the hierarchies and the dynamics and the power relations that obstruct good process and that obstruct good outcomes. So whilst it's welcome to see more women in senior level positions, I think we need to recognize that in many conflict situations, and this is something we observe in most of the places where we work, the civil society actors who are pushing peace processes forward are very often led by women and very often inspired by the life experiences of women who bring their mediation skills into their communities. They're often the people who are mediating between young men who get drawn into armed groups and their communities when they come back from armed groups, for instance, in many different dimensions. So I think what we need to recognize is that women need to be supported not just to become political level mediators, although the more that happens, I think the better, because it's really important that the people who are mediating, as well as the people who are negotiating, represent their communities that they come out of. But that the people who are doing mediation at what we could say is the coalface are predominantly women, and they need support to do that. And so I think we are seeing a transformation. We're seeing a recognition of the damaging impact that unequal gender relations can have in society in general, as well as in peace processes. One can only hope that next year, through the 25th anniversary of Resolution 1325, there's a reinvigorated conversation, both in international institutions, but also and this is a big challenge, how does that conversation percolate into wider society? And it's a process of generational change to an extent, but we shouldn't necessarily sit and wait for that to happen. The question is, how can it be stimulated to happen more quickly?
So, when I was at university, I came across multiple news reports, and I'm talking about, I think, 2012, 2013, between that period, where the government of Sweden at the time was praised for adopting a feminist foreign policy. And a lot of Nordic countries since have often been praised or received positive feedback for their inclusion of feminist principles in their foreign policy directives as well as approaches. On a broader scale, with respect to peace building itself, not just limited to foreign policy, what is your take on the inclusion of feminism or feminist principles in peace building work? You spoke about civil society organizations and networks being led by women, but mediation being a more complex field, notwithstanding the skill of the mediator herself or himself. But do feminist principles have a place in peace building work when it comes to mediation or its aftermath?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just the Scandinavian governments or Sweden that have thought about feminist foreign policies. Germany, France, Canada, many countries have. And even if Sweden has stopped using the framing of having a feminist foreign policy, I think that's partly because of the way discourse can become politicized. So although Sweden has stepped back from saying it has a feminist foreign policy, I think you'll find that an awful lot of their foreign policy is still informed by feminist principles. And what I'd say is we should all be informed by feminist principles. We shouldn't be frightened of the word feminism. I mean, we should be proud to be feminists. What is feminism? Feminism is about reframing power relations between genders. It's about reframing domineering approaches to politics and thinking about equity and equality in society more broadly, and thinking about how we make our societies more inclusive of people who are vulnerable. So to me, feminism is inherent in good peace building work. Now, how you manifest that is a different question. And there'll be some people who want to speak very passionately and openly and push a discourse around a much more transformative approach. And there'll be some who are in a more responsive and step-by-step approach. But I don't think we should be afraid of seeing our work informed by feminism. I think we should be proud of it.
Speaking of feminism, now, in the last few years alone, conflict and security issues worldwide. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about the use of military forces in clamping down on assemblies or demonstrations against certain laws and policies that adopted to mitigate COVID. We're talking about the Ukraine war. We're talking about Gaza and Palestine and Israel's attack on Lebanon itself. Conflict and security issues worldwide seem to be eliciting a militaristic response from governments. Now, there are a number of examples to go by, some of which I mentioned earlier. In an environment like this, a political environment like this, where do peace building, dialogue, mediation, and conflict prevention place themselves where there is such a growing trend of using brute force to tackle security issues?
I mean, in a way, you almost answer the question yourself by posing the question. I mean, of course, it's hugely concerning to see that violence becomes core to the response to violence, that military responses become the first port of call. And that is something we need to push against. We need to bring dialogue back into the resolution of violent conflict. It's there. I mean, there's no question that in all the conflicts you named, there are political actors, there are outside actors who are pushing for a dialogue-oriented response to conflict. The problem is that as technology, I don't know if it's to do with the advances in technology, the ease of access to different types of weaponry, there is a tendency at the moment globally to see military responses as a first port of call. Perhaps there's discussion around a more authoritarian approach to politics in many countries and populism and such issues. I think for those of us in the peace building world, part of our task is to keep on emphasizing the importance of dialogue, to keep on emphasizing the importance of good practice in our work, the need for good analysis of where the drivers of conflict come from, the need to look at power relations in society, and the need to promote opportunities to bring dialogue and to bring politics back into the resolution of conflict. And it's a struggle, but I think it's one that it's imperative that from community level to national political level to the UN, it's imperative that the case continues to be made and that influence is exerted throughout those levels to try and inform the behaviors of those who have access to power in thinking through what steps are taken to address violent conflict. We shouldn't succumb to the notion that a securitized response is the only response.
Do you find that the election of political leaders with inclinations towards the right has anything to do with this trend of adopting securitized responses towards armed conflict increasing? I mean, Trump is the most recent example.
I mean, I don't want to. What I'd observe is that we're seeing a tendency for complexity to be taken out of the resolution of deeply complex issues. So there's a tendency not to look at the nuance, not to try and understand the roots of conflicts and not to understand the competing aspirations. Perhaps people are looking for easy answers. People are looking for quick answers. And the reality is that quick and easy answers often make you pursue a more securitized approach. People feel insecure, and there are good reasons why people in many countries around the world feel insecure. But one needs to then ask whether upping the level of securitization will make you feel more secure or risks escalation and less security long term. And so I think we need to bring complexity and nuance back into our understanding of why conflicts happen, and then understand what sorts of steps can give people confidence to believe that they can live without overly securitized approaches. So it's about the way in which you work in specific conflict situations and the way in which the ethos you bring to dialogue and mediation support. It's also about the way in which politics happens more broadly.
If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. At Pax Politica, we tell stories throughout the world of peace building and human rights that aren't covered by mainstream media. And every bit of support from you would help us do exactly that. So hit that like button and share the video with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.